Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Robert Baylor, Director of Communications at NUCA. Welcome to NUCA's Washington Summit Issue Briefing. First, before we begin, some webinar housekeeping for attendees. Today's webinar will be recorded. It will be available on NUCA's YouTube channel, which can be accessed via nuca.com. It will also be available at WeDigAmerica.org. All participants are muted upon entry. Phone participants can use *6 to mute and unmute themselves. Questions will be asked at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, you can submit a written question at any time using the chat feature, and I'll read them at the conclusion of our discussion. Now let's get started. Our industry celebrated a big victory in March when President Biden signed the FY 2024 appropriations bill. Because of months of hard advocacy work, NUCA was able to prevent nearly $2 billion in cuts from our industry's two state revolving fund programs. One of our top goals in this spring summit is to prevent a similar catastrophe occurring in the fiscal year 2025 appropriations bill. Work has already begun on this legislation, so this is a good month to be on Capitol Hill talking to lawmakers. We have several other top issues we'll be focusing on this summit, from workforce development to supply chain disruptions to lead pipe replacement. And of course, we'll be talking about relationship building with your lawmakers. It's an important election year, and every House district is up for grabs on November 5th. We can be a key part of every House district race and Senate seat, but only if we let our lawmakers know how important this industry is to every American community. Today's briefing will be presented by Zach Perconti, NUCA's talented Vice President of Government Affairs. He'll be joined by Tom Butler, NUCA's Government Affairs Committee Chairman and our immediate past president.
I like Tom.
Thank you all for joining us today on this special NUCA webinar. Zach, I turn it over to you.
No, it was.
Thanks, Bob. Real quick, if everyone can just make sure they're muted before we get started. We've got a lot of information to cover. I'm going to try to deliver this all in as easy to understand format as possible, but the important things you really need to know for the most part are going to be highlighted. All of this, as Bob said, is going to be available for review. We've recorded this, so you'll be able to watch anything again later. We'll take questions at the end. And then, of course, a lot of the supporting supplementary information is already available online at the Summit website. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive in here and really just start off with our asks, right? What are the three things that are bringing us to Washington, D.C. this year? And for the most part, I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by really the meat of our asks. Number one, fully fund water infrastructure programs and provide additional funding for the future to meet critical needs. Number two is to support programs that will help meet the workforce demands of our industry. And number three is to implement all of this investment in accordance with congressional intent. So in other words, to avoid burdensome and restrictive labor and permitting policy, to prevent the administration from attaching a lot of strings to the money that's going to make it harder to do our work. And more importantly, perhaps than any of that, to find out what hurdles the administration has put into place to actually getting this money out the door so we can get these projects moving. So there are only a handful of bills that you actually need to know this time. Keeping it easy for you. The legislation of interest that we're talking about right now. Number one, the fiscal 2025 Interior and Environment Appropriations Bill. That bill right now is in the earliest stages of being drafted, right? So this is the perfect time to actually influence the direction that they go. Recall that this was the bill for last year that we have spent most of the last several months working on fixing. The initial product created by the House would have cut $2 billion from the state revolving funds, so cutting both programs to the bone. And then it would have diverted almost everything that was left to earmarks, grants to specific projects. So the state revolving loan fund would have essentially received nothing last year. That would have led to a catastrophic breakdown of investment in many states. There are some states where the health of those programs already, frankly, isn't great. Cutting $2 billion and zeroing out their share, as 43 states would have seen, would have led to some of those programs, believe it or not, running out of money within a few years. The important thing right now is we're early enough in the process that hopefully we can stop this from happening again. Our goal is when they produce the draft of this legislation, sometime around the next month and a half to 2 months or so, that it won't contain any cuts. And ideally, it'll even contain some modest increases. That's that legislation. We'll talk about it a little more later on. The next two bills both focus on workforce development. The Stronger Workforce for America Act, which is a multi-billion-dollar massive reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. What you need to know about this legislation is that it essentially is the main vehicle for investment, or rather one of three main vehicles for investment in our country's career and technical educational system. So this is a very important bill right now. It contains a lot of reforms and amendments that we really support to the legislation, as well as a lot of additional funding. It's passed the committee in the House, but it's stalled, right? Similar story for the next bill, the Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act. This legislation would create more federal support and more eligibility for students to receive Pell grants, so student grants for short-term career and technical educational programs. So to get more people into the workforce quickly. Also a great bill, also has cleared committee, also has stalled. We'll talk about those two more later on. Next bill, again, the Financing Lead Out of Water Act. We've talked about this a little before. This helps us divert additional resources through private activity bonds to lead service line replacement jobs. So we'll talk about why in a moment, because there's a lot to understand here. But this is an important bill to ensure that, one, we can get resources we need for these jobs, but two, we're not taking all of the money from the general drinking water fund and ensuring that states that don't have lead service line replacement issues still receive their fair share of federal drinking water investment. The last bill, the Fair and Open Competition Act, we've talked about that one extensively. That bill would prohibit the government from mandating a project labor agreement on a job. It's important to us that all of our members, regardless of their labor affiliation status, are able to work on these projects. And government mandated PLAs create a one-size-all solution that doesn't really work for a lot of our members in our chapters. But before we get into all of that, I want to briefly give you all some background on where we are right now with the federal infrastructure investment rollout, because there are a lot of problems right now with the way that this has been done. I don't think anybody is going to be particularly surprised by anything that I'm about to talk about, but I think it'll make a lot of things make sense, and it'll really underscore some of the urgency of ensuring that we have a future pathway for additional federal investment going forward. So the funding rollout is behind schedule. I don't think that is shocking to anyone. Now, most of this, before I go any further, this all comes from an analysis that Politico put together that actually just came out yesterday. We've linked this on social media. I really recommend that you take a few minutes and read through the longer article. There's a lot of really interesting information in there that we just don't have time to cover right now. But essentially, of the four tentpole investment bills that touch our space that Biden has passed since becoming president, less than 17% of that money has actually gone out the door. And of that money, only $125 billion has actually been spent from that $884 billion provided by the infrastructure bill and the American Rescue Plan. Again, if you want to look at this in more detail, the best place to do it is just to go straight to that article. Like I said, we just put it out on social media, so if you just pull up any of NUCA's social medias, you'll see it up there. We'll also probably link this on the Summit website because it's a great resource. Those pieces of legislation from left to right, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and then the American Rescue Plan. Now, granted, about $300 billion from the infrastructure bill isn't actually available to spend until the next 2 fiscal years. But from what they've actually put out there, only a pathetically small amount has actually gone to projects. And in our world, it's beyond pathetic. It's really only a teeny tiny fraction of what they were supposed to have done by now. So again, I know these are a little small, but I'm just doing my best to fit them on here so you can see the back and forth. So of that money, $583 billion has been announced, but only $125 billion has actually been spent. So you can see here, we are way behind where the administration wants to be, and we're way behind where we want to be. And frankly, the bipartisan infrastructure law in particular has really been lagging behind, right? A big chunk of the money that's actually been spent in infrastructure world is All American Rescue Plan Act money. I mean, that's a COVID relief era bill. That came out in 2021. So why are they not where they need to be is a big question that we need to be asking, right? Where is the holdup? What can Congress do to help us get this money out faster? And you'll see from this next slide, there are a couple of particular issues that are a little more regional, but some of these issues have to do with, frankly, how quickly the federal government has actually been signing off. Broadband in particular here is the greatest offender. So most of the broadband money wasn't even announced, in regards to how much every state was going to receive until last summer. The federal government was supposed to have approved most of the state's intended use plans to get that money out the door by December. So far, they've approved 4 states: Louisiana, Kansas, Nevada, and West Virginia. There are a lot of other federal programs that are running into that same hurdle, where the money is out, but the federal government hasn't actually given it to the states to use yet. In some instances, this may frankly be a political thing. State governments who don't get along with the Biden administration, the administration may at times be, I don't want to say playing games, but there are hurdles that have come up because of the lack of good faith cooperation that have prevented the money from getting out. But really a big part of this, frankly, is just the federal government has not moved fast enough to respond to the needs of the states. So you can see, again, some states are doing a little better than others, but in a lot of states that we have chapters, the federal government has just not been getting the money out to them in a timely fashion.
Hey, Zach, not that there's necessarily a definitive answer on this, but with some of the spending requirements / restrictions associated with federal money, with the administration leaving it up to the agencies to figure that out, did that slow down the process? Could it have gone quicker if the administration said, hey, this is how we're going to do it, now everybody do it?
To an extent, yes. I mean, one of the big holdups, for example, was on the Buy America side. We're still, believe it or not, in the process of getting more clarity on some areas, water being one of them. But a big reason why it's taken so long is that the White House didn't actually release a lot of the essential guidance until August of last year. And so if they had actually done that, a lot of the projects that frankly have been kind of on hold, waiting to find out what they need to do, would have moved forward a lot faster. Another example here, and this is not to get too much into the weeds here, as an aside, we're hoping to have the EPA Office of Water come to the summit briefing on Wednesday to talk a little more about where they are. One of the issues the federal government has created with the rollout is exactly to do with BABA requirements. So a lot of money like the American Rescue Plan Act money coming from the EPA is grandfathered in. But under current federal policy, if you take money from, say, a FEMA grant that's not grandfathered in, the whole project all of a sudden becomes BABA, and that could necessitate you taking things out that you've already installed. The EPA knows this is a problem. They told me about one project up in Maine that they were trying to relocate a facility from a floodplain, and they couldn't take the FEMA money that they needed to actually do the job because they have too much stuff already installed that's not BABA compliant under the grandfather, but there's nothing the EPA can do to change that. That has to come from the White House. So really a lot of the issues here have been, in my opinion, a failure by the Office of Management and Budget and by the White House to effectively put these policies out and coordinate among the agencies like they're supposed to. These are part of the reasons why one of our big asks for you all is going to be to pressure Congress to exercise a little more oversight on this. In particular, I think that Congress doesn't really realize how little of the water funding has actually gone out. So this is kind of the big takeaway that I want you to walk away from all of those last slides that I just put up there. Of all of the infrastructure money that's gone out, virtually all of it is surface transportation. when the administration or, some members of Congress talk about how good the rollout's going and how there's a project underway in every single congressional district right now, those are all road jobs. There's almost no water funding that's actually gone out. This is $55 billion in water funding, and we've spent virtually none of it. And we've had 3 years to do this almost. This is a significant issue for us because if you can recall, the last year of this bill's life is fiscal 26. We're coming to Congress right now and asking them for desperately needed additional appropriations to support our industry, not only now, but for the path forward to address the challenges ahead. But they just allocated all of this money and we have nothing to show for it because of how long it's taken the administration to actually get these projects underway. So if there's only one thing you take away from the last few slides, it's that of the $55 billion in drinking water and clean water funding that the federal government has provided, we've spent essentially none of it. And that leads me into our first ask, water infrastructure funding. So you've all probably seen this slide before. This is the breakdown of allotments by programs. You'll see it all ends in fiscal 26. So right now, the EPA has started to receive a lot of this funding, but they haven't actually done a really good job of translating that into projects, right? We only have 2 years left of the EPA receiving that more funding to dole out before the cliff hits and we drop back off to the way we were before 2021. And this is particularly concerning because needs continue to go up this whole time. So we've talked about this before. You've all seen this slide from last year as well. The EPA conducted another drinking water needs update, and they saw $625 billion needs over the next 20 years. Right now, we are on pace for a significant funding shortfall there. Furthermore, we still don't have updated wastewater needs. The EPA last May, when they spoke at our summit, said that they had closed data collection on the Clean Watersheds Needs Survey, the counterpart for that market, and they still have not published it over a year later. However, in 2012, the needs there were at least $271 billion for the next 20 years. So we're expecting that number to go up pretty significantly. In other words, we're looking at $1 trillion in needs over the next 20 years. We are nowhere near hitting that, and it's not going to help us very much to get there if the federal government can't actually spend or get the money out to us to spend on jobs, right? This fiscal 26 cliff should be looming very large in everyone's minds because Congress needs to keep the commitment going, even if the executive isn't doing a very good job of actually getting the money out. The magnitude of the need is just high enough that if we pause, we take our foot off the gas at all, we're going to miss this thing by a mile. So one other thing I want to briefly touch on here that adds a little more context to the needs. We've all talked extensively about lead service line replacement. This is a little more of a regional issue, right? Basically, this more affects states that are east of the Mississippi and Texas. The EPA did do their first ever full survey. The surprises were more so finding that this stuff was very prevalent in the deep south or in the south as well, not just up in the upper Midwest and in the Northeast. But since they've gathered this information, the EPA has, in conjunction with the administration, made a very aggressive commitment to total replacement within 10 years. We are actually right now still awaiting them finalizing a rule later this year, expected probably around October, the lead and copper improvement rule updates, which will probably mandate this, mandate that providers take all of the lead out of their systems by the mid 2030s. What's more, on top of that, we're seeing, of course, for the first time ever, EPA drinking water standards that will apply nationwide. And with all of that comes increased costs for compliance. Now, the concern here, the reason that all of our members, even folks in states where you're not doing any lead work because you don't have those lines. The reason we all need to be invested in this is they're funding most of this through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. There is a set aside there that was created from the infrastructure bill that is specifically dedicated to replacing lead service lines and only to replacing lead service lines. Well, if we now have a mandate to do this, knowing the way that the federal government and Congress operates, the concern is that all drinking water monies will increasingly be diverted to areas that still need to meet this mandate. So if you're in a state that doesn't have any lead service line problem, or where it's only a marginal issue in a few areas, your state could lose out on all of its money if somebody at the EPA or the administration gets the bright idea that this needs to be the priority and that they're going to start diverting those dollars away. This is not an imminent problem, but we want to get ahead of this before it becomes one, right? I would not be surprised if by 2030, you get some folks talking about how we need to be a little more strategic about how we fund this money. And recall that changes to the drinking water formula that would have adjusted for things like population growth and whatnot have already failed. So the federal government is already not operating this thing as efficiently as it should be in terms of where the money is going. Something to be concerned about. It's a reason why we need to have a little bit of solidarity here. But the issue of an unfunded mandate is a very real one. Above all, though, what we really need to just keep in mind is the future of federal water infrastructure investment is very unclear. So if you can look at this graph here, you'll see an estimate of infrastructure-related water outlays over the 10 or so years since the infrastructure bill has been passed. We're coming into the peak of the money actually being allocated, right? Not spent, but allocated through federal channels. You can see after 2026, we start getting into the drop-off. 2027, that'll be a lot of those monies from 2026 really finally starting to come out, plus some of the holdup. But then from 2028 to 2029, we start seeing major drop-offs. And by 2031, we're only looking at a supplement of $2 billion a year, which is roughly equivalent to a lot of the current appropriation spending. By 2032, the money will have essentially dried up. That puts us in a very bad position long term. We really cannot.
Sorry, Zach, I was just going to ask, is that the amount of money that's been allocated or the amount of money that they're anticipating they are going to spend?
So these are going to be the outlays. This is the money that's going out the door in theory. But for the most part, we're really looking at allocations here. The spending is a little harder to pinpoint because the federal government has been slow, right? We should have seen a lot of this money already going out. But this is what the federal government is shooting out there year over year, at least according to this one estimate.
Hey, Zach,
so we may see a slightly longer bell curve here in terms of the money actually going out. But of course, if that's happening, that means we're not spending it now. So, you know, just because it's drug out a little longer doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing.
So do you think it's fair to say that that 2023 1.7 was what was outlaid, or was that what was projected to be outlaid? Do we have any idea on that?
That's gone out. Yeah. So the 6.4 is an estimate for this year. Frankly, I don't know if they're going to hit that. You know, what we've heard repeatedly from the administration is that 2022 was the year to set everything up. And 2023 was really about getting those programs defined and the channels in place. And 2024 is about getting all of the money out the door. Of course, they would say that because it's an election year and they have nothing to show for it other than, as I said, surface transportation jobs. But it remains to be seen as to whether or not they'll actually be able to change things and get that $6.4 billion moving. I'll be very curious to hear from you all throughout the year if you actually start to see these projects happen. I kind of have my doubts the way things have been going so far, but I would love to be proven wrong on that front.
Zach, I've got a question from Shane Webley, which I think is perfect right now. Is there any information regarding what funding requests were versus what has been issued? Do we know there is a large disparity between funds issued and dollars requested? You may have answered.
Yeah, Zach, I was trying to get in earlier and I kept getting muted, but that's my question is just that, okay, so this is what they're forecasting and we're saying that not a lot of money has been issued, but do we have any information that the states are asking for the money and they're just not getting it? Or is it that the states aren't asking for it and therefore they're not getting it?
So it depends on the program. When it comes for the water side of things, they're certainly asking for it. The EPA SRF program usually operates fairly successfully in terms of actually transferring the dollars from the federal government to the states. Right now, it's just not moving as fast as it should be. So the states are certainly asking for the money here. Now, for some of the other areas, the answer, unfortunately, is it depends. So they're certainly asking for all of the transportation dollars. On the broadband side, it really varies state to state. Some of them have state broadband offices that are, churning ahead and really struggling with the federal government to actually get their plans approved. Other states maybe only have 2 people and they're just, really trying to figure out how to actually do this. The only area that you're seeing states be, I would say, more reluctant to actually ask for money is in a lot of the climate and green initiatives. Some of the red states are just not interested, and so they're not really asking for that money. But on the water side in particular, they're asking. The federal government has just not been moving at the pace it needs to actually meet those requests.
Do we have any statistical information that we could use when we're in DC that before we go to beat a drum about money not getting put out on the street, that we could say, listen, there were $10 billion in requests made in 2023 and 1.7 billion was actually allocated?
So the answer to that, unfortunately, is slightly more complicated. And this is partially because the administration has not really put out any information in one central place about spending outlays, right? That's part of why it's taken folks so long to actually get a sense of the numbers here. The administration just hasn't made it easy. Now, the best way, I would say, to relate this to your particular state is to pull your intended use plans and just look at the top line figures there to show how much in terms of projects still need to be done. But overall, I think the best thing to show folks is that graph. I'll pull it back up here of just how little of the water funding has actually gone out. There is virtually none of it that's been spent in terms of appropriations. I mean, we're looking at a fraction so small, you can barely see the yellow line on here. There is some more additional, there's a little more additional information in that Politico article in terms of some figures. It just came out yesterday, so I'm actually trying to pull some more stuff that we can work into our talking points in particular. But that's probably mostly the best we're going to find. As an aside, or a reminder, I guess I should say, the summit talking points will contain a lot more supporting information, statistics, things like that you all can use as your easiest point of reference. Those will be released. We're shooting for next Thursday, possibly a couple of days earlier, but we usually like to get those out about a week in advance to ensure they're as current as possible when you get to DC. Yeah, Bob, can you put the Politico article in the chat?
Absolutely.
Thanks. So the main takeaway here really is that water infrastructure is just critically underfunded, right? Federal spending on water infrastructure prior to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was just 4% in 2017. It was 30% in the 70s. With all of this money, if they actually get it out in time, we're expected to rise to roughly 7% by 2028 at its peak. That's pathetically small. Now, the risk here isn't that they take too long to get the money out and it gets yanked away or it expires or it dries up, but they're just not getting where they need to be. Part of this is the administration's fault, as we've said, but a large part of this as well does fall on Congress. Since the infrastructure bill passed, there has been a failure to fully appropriate water funding for a lot of the authorized programs over the last couple of years. There are a lot of smaller grant programs that are very important, too many to list right now, frankly. But there's everything from on-site septic to additional resources for certain communities of need that have small grants that the program was created in the bill, but Congress hasn't given them any money. Or instead of the 50 million that was authorized, they've only appropriated 5 million. Here I do once again need to note the distinction between authorizations and appropriations. Most of the money in the infrastructure bill for water was simultaneously authorized and appropriated. So, authorizing is me saying you can have $50. An appropriation is me actually giving you $50. For most of the stuff, like the state revolving funds, they did that at the same time. For a lot of these smaller programs, they gave a promise essentially of up to $50 billion or 50 million that can be spent. And then they've either woefully underfunded it or they just haven't funded it at all. So our ask there is really general. It's go back to the bill, take a look at the intentions here behind all of these different programs and actually fund them, actually support them, and actually fund the state revolving fund annual appropriations at the level that we envisioned here. So right now we've been looking roughly at $3 billion. We're hoping that this year they'll give us closer to $4 billion. We're not putting a specific number on this because the last thing I want you all to do is to go into an office and start haggling, right? Not that you would do that, but that some of the offices get the intent or the impression that we're there to talk very specific math. The message that they need to take away from all of the slides I've just put up there is about how much more work needs to be done, about how slow the funding has actually been to get out there, and about how we're in very real danger of falling into a hole we can't dig ourselves out of here. The fiscal 2025 appropriations process has already begun in earnest. There is still a risk that lawmakers will divert funding intended for the state revolving funds to specific projects as grants. Doing that undermines the long-term health of the state revolving fund programs. It creates a problem for our industry in the future. We need that dedicated funding source. We can't afford it to be undermined, even if we're working on those jobs now. And so our ask there again is to, we need every dollar we can get. These projects are great, but you need to add that funding on top of the dedicated annual state revolving fund dollars. And then last but not least, we really need to avoid these unfunded mandates. The EPA lead and copper rule, as I said, we're expecting that in October. That's going to create a mandate to replace lead service lines. And with these drinking water standards, the costs that systems are going to have to bear is going to continue to rise. So we can't afford, one, to raid our other resources and deny states what they need to pay for others. But two, we can't afford to just keep jacking up the costs and raising the prices of necessary work without actually having the money available for us to do those projects. So this by far and away, I think is one of our top issues, not just this year, but for the rest of the decade, frankly. And as we get closer to fiscal 2026, we really need to convey a strong message about this now. Keep in mind that while the money doesn't run out until 2026, Congress will start writing the fiscal 2026 appropriations bills when we're in town next year for Summit. So we really need to put ourselves in a good footing now if we're going to have any realistic possibility of reauthorizing the state revolving funds for the rest of the decade. So we have three key asks. Number one, fully fund water infrastructure programs. End the practice of taking earmarks from SRF funding. Community projects should be supplemental to SRF appropriations. Number two, Congress needs to exercise oversight to identify the hurdles that are holding up water funding and help get these projects actually moving. It's frankly unacceptable that it has taken this long and we've spent so little of the money on actual construction. And then number three, co-sponsor the Financing Lead Out of Water Act, which would expand the use of PAB eligible projects to include lead service line replacement. We've talked a lot about PABs in the past. It's not a major focus of this summit, although we do have a fact sheet available if you want to talk about it. But the importance here is, again, finding other ways to fund these projects and avoiding a situation where states that don't have lead service lines will lose out on their money to pay for states that do. All right, we're going to take questions on water infrastructure and whatnot at the end, along with everything else. This section is a lot shorter. I just want to briefly touch on a couple of things here. So switching gears to workforce development, we've covered really the first two of our three asks. This is the last priority area. So I want to throw some pretty shocking numbers out to everybody, and I don't think any of these will be a surprise, but when you put them in front of Congress, it does open some eyes. So at least 501,000 additional employees are going to be needed across the industry this year. Next year, the current estimates that we've seen have an additional 454,000 on top of that. Now, keep in mind, this is all on top of the normal pace of hiring. So we are going to be almost 1 million people short just in construction over the next 2 years as this infrastructure money hopefully actually gets to projects. It's also worth noting again here, you can see from that slide earlier how very little of the money has been spent outside of surface transportation. Well, one market that's particularly overheated already is broadband, with all of the private money that's in that sector. They've received virtually none of their money, and they're going to get a lot of that dumped on them pretty quickly once their states approve their intended use plans. So if you're a water contractor competing for, an HDD operator or somebody who's entry level trying to get into this world, you're now going to be competing against the broadband guy who's got more money than he knows what to do with all of a sudden. It's just another reason why the federal government needs to not only provide support for all of construction, but some more dedicated support and resources for water to meet these major needs that we have long term. Now, in addition to that, this is where I briefly, as an aside, bring up the Buy America regulations again. As many as 2.1 million manufacturing jobs may go unfilled by the end of the decade. Between all of the chips and science investments, all of the investment that manufacturers have had to make to comply with Buy America requirements, we're going to potentially run into supply chain issues by the end of the decade. Nobody wants to go back to the way it was during COVID, I think. And we really need to get people into those positions if we're going to ensure a healthy supply chain for our industry. This is also, as an aside, another reason why long-term federal water investment is important. All of the suppliers in our world who are manufacturing water projects or products for water projects, a lot of their facilities, frankly, won't even be ready until mid-decade to supply the need. We need to make sure there's actually money in that market to make that economically viable, or we've created another supply chain issue for ourselves. Now, nearly 80% of contractors have reported a moderate to high difficulty in finding skilled employees. I'm surprised that figure's not even higher, frankly, from what I hear from you all. It seems like just about everybody is still having a hard time hiring, and we don't envision that to get better anytime soon, especially because according to the government's own estimates, roughly 1/3 of the water sector workforce is eligible to retire within the next 10 years. That doesn't scare you, but well, you must be one of the people that's about to retire, because that scares the heck out of me. So probably should have put this on 2 slides, but I'm just going to run through all of these. We've got a handful of asks here. Number 1 is to specifically support programs that will help meet the workforce demands of our industry. There are some existing grants out there that the federal government has that are dedicated for the water workforce, but they don't have a ton of resources. One in particular that we've identified is the EPA's Innovative Water Infrastructure Workforce Development Grant. We would really like to see in the annual appropriations process additional money allocated to that program. I think it's really important that we have dedicated resources that are just for us here, that we're not competing with general construction for workforce development dollars. We need programs that are designed specifically to help not only you, but to help people at all levels of the industry. Believe it or not, I've actually heard of a couple of instances where projects at wastewater plants are being held up because the city doesn't have enough operators to actually take delivery of the site. That's just one example of how all of these challenges at all levels are impacting us directly. More dedicated support for the industry would help us tremendously there. Number two is to pass the Stronger Workforce for America Act. Supports the development of a stronger skills-based economy. We'll have a link to some of the fact sheets that the committee has put out on that on WeDigAmerica.org if you want more information on it. We don't need to get into the particulars on this bill, frankly. It's a very long bill. It's a very large bill. The important thing is it's reauthorizing, modernizing, and providing additional investment for our career and technical educational system. It's providing us with the resources we need to train the next generation of water industry workforce. The next one, though, I think is one of the most important bills that Congress has proposed this year, because it would help us a lot quicker, right? If you have somebody go to a trade school, you don't get that person into the workforce right away. It's going to take, a year, 2 years for them to actually become somebody that you could put out on a job site. The Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act is designed to make short-term certified credential and training programs more accessible by extending eligibility for federal Pell student aid grants to those programs. So basically, if you have a short-term training program, I believe it's between 199 to 600 hours, so a few months, that is certified by the state, you would be able to use a federal Pell Grant to pay for the cost of that program. So what that would do is create another avenue for us to get people into the workplace, not within 2 years, but within 6 months. And then, you can supplement all of that with on-the-job training to get that person to where they really need to be a good operator, to be a good laborer, to be somebody that you can trust on the job site. That would help us a lot quicker than anything else that the federal government has proposed. And we really think that they need to move quickly to pass that legislation. It's been held up so far because of some opposition from private colleges, universities who don't like the way they're proposing to pay for this. But it's important that we get the support that we need and push through that opposition.
Hey, Zach,
Mm-hmm.
that 199 to 600 hours, we'll just assume that's right for now. Is there a time, is that like full-time only, or could that be 2 hours a week for however many weeks, or do we know that?
I do not know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay.
The intention here, though, that they've said repeatedly is basically being done with this in like 6 months. So it's the goal is short-term programs, not necessarily in the number of hours time, it's the number of months is really what folks have focused on here. Again,
Gotcha.
we'll put the details on this legislation that the committee has provided online. That one it may be good to know a little more of the particulars on, and we'll put some of those in the talking points. But what you need to know here is this helps us solve our workforce problem quickly. And the fact that private colleges don't like that, and I guess to give a little more information, basically they want to pay for this by prohibiting private universities with endowments over a certain size to access certain federal student aid programs. In other words, if your university is a private school and it's ludicrously wealthy, you should be using that endowment to provide your students with federal aid or with student aid, rather than having them rely on federal student aid. Instead, we would divert a lot of that federal student aid money to people who are trying to go into these programs that the program can't afford to pay for them to attend it, right? So naturally, a lot of the wealthy private universities got really upset about this and have lobbied aggressively against the bill. Our goal is to talk a little bit of sense into Congress here. They need to either come up with some sort of solution to change how they're paying for it that everyone can live with, or they need to tell the rich private schools to shove it and pass it anyway. frankly, a lot of them are upset about the private universities right now anyway. So, this could be an opportunity for us to score a major win here, but we need to be aggressive about it. The very last bullet here, before we transition to logistics and questions, we want to encourage the administration to avoid disruptive regulatory measures that increase pressure on the labor market. This is an area we're not really focusing on it at Summit, but this is an area that I'm sure some of you have a lot to talk about on. We've seen things like the Biden administration's project labor agreement mandate that really hurt some of our members in states where unions aren't as active. We've also seen a whole host of regulatory changes that are harmful, everything from the OSHA walk-around rule to a whole slate of proposed changes to joint employer and independent contractor. This is something where, again, we don't want to get into a ton of detail on it, especially given that we have a mixed membership. But if there are areas where you've been personally affected by these policies, as well as a few of them that we'll spotlight that I think affect everyone, regardless of labor affiliation, we do want you to take a moment and talk about how that's harming the rollout, right? In a tight labor market, now is really not the time to start carving it up any further. The only legislation of note there really we want to talk about, again, is the Fair and Open Competition Act. If you would be affected by a project labor agreement mandate, talk about why that's a bad idea. If you're not affected by it, then you don't need to spend time talking about it. But we do want to make sure, ideally, that bill should pass the House this year. We need them to vote on it. So with the last 10 or so minutes, I do want to take a couple more questions. So I'm going to run briefly through some tips and logistics for the upcoming summit. We'll go into more detail about all of this when we're on site. So we all, I think, here kind of know the general tips for a successful meeting. Just as a reminder, a lot of these even apply when you're reaching out to the offices. Make sure, your EDs have a template that we put up that they can use. But if there's any back and forth, or if you're having a hard time getting through to an office, really convey to them the reason that you're coming in. You're a constituent, you're an industry expert, you have got a wealth of knowledge that you want to provide, and you see some very real problems right now with the state of the industry and the way that the federal government is regulating and rolling out the money. There are major workforce challenges, and then there are long-term water infrastructure and other infrastructure needs that we desperately need to address. Do use all of the resources that we have, and do not hesitate to reach out to me at any point during the process. So briefly to overview our leave behind materials. These are at this point, with the exception of the talking points, which will be out next week, all available on WeDigAmerica.org. Take some time over the next 2 weeks to familiarize yourself with them. You don't need to memorize them. They're there as a resource for you, and they're there as a resource for lawmakers. In addition, make sure you bring some business cards to DC. Any supplementary materials you all want to provide, please think about what you want to print off and bring in. There are other issues that we all have that I'm sure folks want to talk about. One thing I didn't mention at all, for example, is damage prevention. Some of your states have done some great stuff on that. Some of your chapters have done some great stuff on that. But the PHMSA reauthorization bill, believe it or not, is still held up. The one committee that's actually done its job is Transportation and Infrastructure, and they just had a hearing on it again this week to kind of pressure the rest of Congress to get moving on that. So if your chapter is working on a bill, feel free to bring some information on that to DC and talk to your lawmakers about how, look, our state's trying to do this. We really need to get the PHMSA bill moving. Likewise, if there are local issues or other things you want to talk about, just prepare that information, bring it with you, send it to me in advance. I'd appreciate that, just so I have an idea of what everybody's talking about. But we're going to have our folders ready on site. No surprises as to what's in there. Please reach out for scheduling any meetings if needed. So your EDs, I know, are all hard at work trying to get some meetings in. We are going to be there a couple of days before the Labor Day weekend, but they are scheduled, Congress is scheduled to be in town through Friday. And believe it or not, they actually have a number of committee votes and markups and hearings already scheduled for the day that we're in town. So it'll be a busy day, but for the most part, your lawmakers will be there. If you want to meet with them personally, you may have to play a little bit of hardball. You may need to press the office a little bit. If they say, well, they can't meet with you, their schedule is busy, ask them if you can just do a photo op or if you can say hi. Sometimes those photo ops will turn into 5, 10, 15 minutes with the member. If you need any help with that or you're not hearing from offices, have your ED contact me. We're within that window now where I'm getting involved, and I am very happy to help. I just saw a question pop up in the chat. Will folders be provided at Summit? Yes. We're printing those out now. There is a jot form that I think closed yesterday that the EDs had, but we can also provide that link to attendees if there are folks who are attending on their own who need a number of folders for their meetings. All of those materials will be provided on site. The rest of this is largely logistics. I'll skip that for now so we have a little more time for questions. Just remember, business attire is recommended when you're packing, but bring your comfortable shoes. And when you're scheduling meetings, do keep in mind our travel times. We are closer this time at the Hyatt Regency than we have been in the past. It is a maybe 7 or 8 minute walk to the Senate. It is about a 10-minute ride to the House. And then it takes roughly 10 minutes to walk across the Capitol complex, 20 if you're slow. So if you've got meetings back to back while you're scheduling them, I recommend asking to set up that escort underneath the Capitol building. There's one other event that I want to talk about real quickly. This is important for NUCA, it's important for you, and it's something I really urge everyone to keep in mind if you haven't made your travel plans already, or if your plans are flexible. I know it's Labor Day weekend. I know a lot of people want to get home early on Friday or Thursday night so they can go out of town, go on vacation with their families, or just enjoy a few days off. However, for the first time since I've been with NUCA, and I think even before that for quite some time, we are hosting our congressional reception in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee room in conjunction with the committee. From Thursday, from 4 to 5:30, after the meetings wrap up, we will be on Capitol Hill in the office buildings for our closing reception. Lawmakers and staff are invited. That is open to them. In fact, that event is actually available on the Speaker of the House's calendar. We've provided them with a link that they can share so staff can attend, as well as the general invite that can be shared. So we're hoping and expecting a lot of folks to come to that. I know we've asked you to invite people to the wrap-up reception in the past. Doing that reception inside is a lot different than doing it off campus. If they're, a lot of the staff will work until 6:30, 7 o'clock, especially if it's a busy day like the 23rd is shaping up to be. They don't really have time to leave the office buildings, but if they can pop down to a reception for 10, 15 minutes, grab a bite, grab a drink, talk to a few people, and then go back to their office, they will do that. Likewise, any lawmakers that you can't meet during the day, unless they're in votes or doing a fundraiser, and 4 o'clock is before most of those start, they may be able to swing by the reception. So we're really urging you all, one, please try to be there, but two, especially if an office is playing a little bit of hardball or saying the member's not available, be sure to invite your members of Congress and their staff to attend. I'm hoping we can get a really great turnout. I want to make this something we do every year. That is also right now, frankly, probably going to be our main guest speaker opportunity because we've changed the schedule around with the board meeting on Wednesday and whatnot. Our only guest speaker on Wednesday will hopefully be the EPA Office of Water. But on Thursday, we're expecting Chairman Graves from the Transportation Committee to speak. He is the one that's sponsoring this for us to book the room, so we're assuming he'll be there. We've also invited the ranking member, Rick Larson, to speak for a few minutes. This is more of a casual event. It's an opportunity to mingle and whatnot, but if you want to really get a chance to meet the folks who are in charge of our most important committee, that's going to be the best opportunity to do that. There is an invitation that will be printed in the folders. We'll also make this image available on the Summit website so you can email it to folks directly. I think it may have already gone out, but if it hasn't, we'll provide that to everyone again. Like I said, this is going to be a great opportunity for us. I'm really looking forward to doing this event in the office buildings. It's very different from doing it off campus. I've been to quite a few of these before, and they're usually really great opportunities for dialogue. But we're very excited, and we're really hoping that we have a lot of our members stick around for it. So can't stress enough. Try to take a late flight or try to leave Friday morning. We really want everyone to stay for this if you can.
Zach, I want to add something in here. Everybody that's on the call, when you get to DC, when we're talking specifically at the briefing prior to going to the Hill, if there's anything that you don't understand at all, ask us to explain it more and more. We want to make it very simple to talk about this. And we don't need, or we don't want anybody to try and show up to an office and sound like a legislator. I mean, just imagine if your congressman or one of his staffers tried to show up at your office and act like he was an expert in construction. You're going to see right through it. You're going to see all the holes in how they're trying to talk about it. We don't want you to be doing the same thing when you show up there. You talk about your stuff, you talk about it in the way that makes sense to you. And any of that really technical stuff, you give them Zach's card, Zach follows up with them. You close the loop with them a week or two later as well. And it's a really good way to make sure we get follow up on all this stuff.
Yeah, I really can't encourage you all enough. One of the best questions that you can get asked in a meeting is one you don't know the answer to. Follow-ups are the reason really we come to town for this. You know, we try to change minds and we try to spread our message at DC when we're here for DC, but we're only here for one day. You know, what we really want to do is help build those relationships between you as an individual, between your chapter, between NUCA National, and these offices. And the more opportunities we have for that back and forth throughout the year, the better. I just saw in the chat real quick. So for those of you who are attending for the first time, your chapter are the ones that are setting up the meetings. They are the EDs and whatnot, like I said, are encouraged, especially at this point, to reach out to me with any questions or if they have any need any help getting in touch with particular offices. Sometimes when the DC guy, you know, wades into the conversation, it wakes the office up a little bit. If you are coming as an independent member or you are new to NUCA, new to your chapter, reach out to us directly and we can help you either set some meetings up or identify where you should be throughout the day. You know, if there's a chapter that you can go along with. With that, does anyone have any questions? It's about 4 o'clock, but we can stay on for a few additional minutes to take questions.
Hey, Zach, it's Rob, Chris. I have a quick, strange question for you. Members of the House get on the committees how? Out of curiosity, considering Ohio only has one committee member, and I would like to encourage some more of them to be on the T&I committee.
So basically, the way that it works is at the start of a new Congress, you as a lawmaker will draw up a list of committees you'd like to be on. Okay. And you will submit that list to your congressional leadership, your party's leadership, right? There's something called, the Republicans call it the steering committee. The Democrats have a different name for it. But basically, they'll go through that list and using the system and set of rules that each party has, both of which are different, they'll decide what committees you're going to be on. For the most part, they'll go at least mostly based off of your list of requests. You'll at least get one or two of the ones you've requested generally, but it all really depends. There are some committees that are higher priority than others. There are some committees like appropriations where generally if you're on that, you're only on that. But what they mostly do is they break them up into buckets. So you've got like A priority committees, B committees, and C committees, and everybody can only get one A committee. Transportation and infrastructure is not one of those committees. Basically, if you ask to be on T&I, you can probably be on T&I. So that is a great thing for you all to do. If you are in states that don't have a lot of lawmakers that are on this committee, encourage the office to say, hey, you know, we're almost in the 119th Congress. I don't know if the congressman has thought about what committees he wants to be on, but you know, maybe consider T&I. Now, if they're on energy and commerce, they're already on one of our priorities as well. That's an A priority committee. That one has drinking water. It also has broadband. It also has a lot of the electric stuff. And then, our other priority committee on the House side is education and the workforce. That one is also, I think, not a priority committee, so you can be on that one and some of the others. That answer is really an oversimplification. This is like one of those crazy complicated congressional procedure things. Both parties have different rules in both chambers. But basically, if they ask to be on T&I, they can probably be on that committee.
Okay, good answer. And that makes total sense. I'll check our Ohio guys on the energy and commerce too and see where they're at and see exactly how it's broken down. I know Ohio is very underrepresented on T&I, and that's why I asked. I think they could probably use some more representation. Thanks, Zach.
Especially for a committee that's 75 members. I'm really surprised. I just looked it up, and you're absolutely right. Definitely make the ask.
Okay, good.
T&I is one of, if not the largest committee in the House. So lots of opportunities for your states to have more of a presence on there, but people just have to ask.
Well, we all need infrastructure. I don't think there's a state that doesn't, unless I'm not sure. So,
does anyone have any other questions?
I was just going to ask Zach if the push on that, those lead mandates is not so much the mandate part, but more so the unfunded part, or is it? Do you not want to frame it that way, or I mean, what's NUCA's stance? Is it more the objection to the mandates, or more the objection to the unfunded part?
It's the unfunded part, right? So we have no problems with the federal government, frankly, requiring that lead come out. One, it's more work for members in areas that have lead service lines, but two, it's a public health measure. It's important that it gets done, and frankly, it's going to have to be done at some point. Now, the timeline of the mandate, I will say, is of concern. I don't think it's realistic to do it in 10 years. I think it would be something to aspire to. It's a great aspirational goal. But if you mandate 10 years and then you don't provide the funding to get anywhere near that goal, that's the area where, again, I foresee them trying to raid general water funding to meet this thing. There's no requirements to really do a lot of the other sort of drinking water projects, unless you run into some of the compliance things around like the new EPA drinking water standards or PFAS and emerging contaminants. There's not really a timeline that you have to do those jobs. If we set a 10-year timeline to take all the lead out of the system and we're at year 6 and we're out of dedicated money for it and we still have almost all of it that needs to come out of the ground, then we're going to start, I think, raiding other sources of water funding to pay for that. So the issue really is with the unfunded part. And then I guess as a side note, it would be 10 years is not enough time to do this.
Are there any other questions? We're at 4 o'clock, 4-4. If not, Zach and Tom, thank you very much for your time today. We would also like to thank our many national partners for their continued and very kind support of NUCA and our advocacy efforts on behalf of the American utility construction industry. Today's webinar has been recorded. A recording of this webinar will be made on our YouTube channel probably by tomorrow afternoon. I'll send out something on social media as well too on it. And thank you for your time today to join us for this special industry webinar and for supporting NUCA. Please remember to refer to our summit website, WeDigAmerica.org, for information about the May 22nd, 23rd Washington Summit. That's WeDigAmerica.org. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and please enjoy the rest of your week.